In the previous episode of our plan writing series, we discussed how to be confident in knowing you're on the right direction in your training plan writing. Today, in this episode, we are going the next step and we're going to start to plan the journey. Assessments was all about understanding where we are starting with our journey. And we also have an idea about where we want to end up with addressing our weaknesses and maybe setting some goals. This is where I think the fun bit starts and we get to plan out our journey from point A to point B. However, we're going to start this with a broad view. Imagine you're painting a painting. You need to first set the foundation before we start filling in the details. To come back to our journey analogy, I want you to imagine you're planning a road trip. Now, if you were doing this, you would likely just be selecting the destinations or stop-offs along the way before you start deciding which roads you're going to take. We're going to take the same approach with training plan writing, and what we're going to do is, instead of planning our stop-offs or destinations to visit along the way, we're going to set some training goals, which are going to be our intermediate goals along our training journey. Then very simply, we can just join up the dots, or like you would using Google Maps, is just plan the journey between those destinations. Some of the most accomplished climbers in the world are very good at setting meticulous goals, and in this way it makes their training very directed. Without goals, it's really easy to get lost in your training and not know where you're going. So what do I mean by these stop-offs or these training goals along your journey? At a simplest level, they are just going to be specific intermediate goals which ultimately help you work towards your big goal, which is probably improving performance, reaching a new grade, or climbing a specific project. From the assessment, you'll have an idea if you want to work on flexibility, finger strength, endurance, or something like this. And this is where your goal starts, but we need to make it a little bit more specific so it helps us direct our training. So, for example, a bouldering specialist might want to work on finger strength and core strength to achieve their ultimate goal of climbing a harder grade. However, we want to be more specific with this goal setting, and this is going to refer back to what we did in our assessment stage. The details are going to come in measurable numbers within our training. So for example, a boulderer that's trying to improve finger strength might be starting at 120% of body weight on a finger strength test. They might want to build that to 130% so that they have some measurable direction within their training. Now we have two very important details within our planning process. A focus, for example, finger strength, but also a framework to build a timeline. So if we're moving from 120% finger strength to 130% finger strength, we're going to have to set a realistic time frame at which we can achieve that change. The finger strength example is a nice one because it's really simple and really measurable. However, if you're writing your own training plan, it's likely that there's multiple things you've addressed or would like to train in order to get better at climbing. When it comes to setting a training focus for your plan, I recommend choosing 2 or maybe 4 different training focuses, but no more, because it really needs to be simple. It could even be just one training focus, for example, finger strength, if it's your first time writing a self-coached plan. Don't overcomplicate it at this stage, because ultimately your training plan will be harder to stick to, and there's the possibility that you'll just end up plateauing in multiple different areas without having a decent focus within your training. Once you know where your goals and your training focus is, we move on to the next bit, which is planning your timeline. The best plans are realistic and achievable. To be realistic with your training, break down your training goals into small steps so that you can monitor your progress along the way, see if you're hitting these small steps, and see if your training was ultimately achievable. If we go back to the finger strength example of building from 120 to 130%, what we're going to do is we're going to set that 130% in the future and then work backwards. This way we can see these small steps and the speed or rate at which we're planning to increase our finger strength to achieve that goal. We have now added a timeline to our training, and we can start to see if our training looks realistic. It also allows us to monitor our training along the way, and if we find that we're not progressing at the rate at which we've planned out, we can look back at our goals and reconsider what is now a realistic time frame according to our time, our energy, and how much we can train. At this stage, it should be obvious to see that to improve in your training, you need to get stronger, fitter, more flexible, whatever it is. And to do this, we need to introduce a really big training principle at this part of the plan, which is progressive overload. The principle of progressive overload is often referred back to the 6th century BC, where you may have seen images depicting a man carrying a bull from an infant through to an adult. And each day that man carried the bull and the bull grew bigger, the man would also gain in strength and size so that he could support the weight of the bull. The idea is simple. If you add load to the body progressively over time, your body will adapt to be able to handle that load that you give it. Of course, this needs to happen slowly and progressively over a time period. To plan progressive overload into your training plan, we must first appreciate your training history and your starting point. This is really important that you don't follow someone else's plan based on their training history. If you're starting hangboarding, for example, but you have never hangboarded before, appreciate that you're going to need to do this very slowly in the first few weeks, maybe just one session and a really short one at that, so that you gradually build it into the training plan. Whereas someone that's been doing 2 hangboarding sessions a week for the past few months, they might find that they can add more volume or more intensity to the plan at a quicker rate. Your primary focus at the beginning of a training plan is to build volume and not intensity. And this is especially true if the training methods are new to you. This will help you build movement awareness, confidence, and robustness within your body. Being able to tolerate the training that you're doing is one of the most important factors in progressing within your ability. Building up the intensity will often come later down the line and coincide with either building for a climbing trip, a peak season, or a competition. If you're not training to perform at your best for any particular point in the year, then you might simply just add in blocks of intensity or recruitment to consolidate that strength and then build back into a volume building block later on in the year. Before we get into an example of a zoomed out training plan, which covers all of the topics we've discussed so far, we should briefly mention what we mean by training blocks. Training blocks are often used to chunk down individual periods within a training plan, which might even have a more distinct focus within that training block. Focused training blocks might, for example, look at building primarily strength or fitness. However, at this stage, we're not going to dive into block training, which looks to focus on specific areas, because most beginner to advanced climbers can see great success from following a concurrent training plan, which basically means training multiple different focuses at the same time. As long as your goals are focused and few, don't be concerned about the interference of training different training methods until you reach a very advanced level or elite level of climbing performance. One thing we are definitely going to carry over from block training is the idea of introducing deload weeks into our training plan. Very simply, a deload week is going to be introduced every 3 to 4 weeks, and that week is going to be roughly 50% of the peak training load within that 3 to 4 week period. Let's look at an example of an 8-week training plan where we are going to focus on the 4 things we measured in our episode 1 where we looked at assessments. Here we were looking at our endurance, our pull-up strength, our finger strength, and our flexibility. In this plan, we're identifying endurance and pull-ups as the thing we want to focus on most in the training plan. If we look across the 8-week period, we're trying to progress these measures much more than we are the measures which we identified as a lower focus for us in our training. Making these 2 things that we addressed as a weakness the focus of the training plan is going to help improve our success in building upon these. In the next episode, we're going to be covering how we choose the exercises that go into our training plan. We're going to be looking at energy systems, strength and conditioning, and the SAID principle.